Rocko's Modern Life is a show that premiered in a really interesting spot in the timeline of Nickelodeon cartoons. Originally in 1991, when Nickelodeon first started airing original cartoons, there were only 3 cartoons in rotation: Rugrats, Doug, and The Ren Stimpy Show, all of which were vastly different cartoons. Rugrats would revolve around talking babies and how they perceive the world. Doug would follow the life of a preteen boy and, more often than not, his daily struggles. And Ren and Stimpy, well... Ren and Stimpy was controversial in many overprotective parents' eyes. The blatant gross-out scenes and racy humor would land the show in hot water time after time. In the year to follow, 1992, no new original cartoons would air on Nickelodeon, but then, in 1993, we would see only one new cartoon premiere, and that show would be Rocko's Modern Life. The show followed the modern life of a generally polite, shy, and easily scared young adult wallaby named Rocko, along with his best friends Heffer Wolf, the overweight and over-enthusiastic steer, and Filbert, the neurotic and generally awkward turtle. The show is known for launching the careers of both Tom Kenny, the voice of Heffer Wolf, Dog from Cat Dog, SpongeBob SquarePants, and many other famous shows, and Carlos Alazraqui, the voice of Rocko, Spyro the Dragon, the Taco Bell Chalupa, and many more. In a sense, Rocko's Modern Life was kind of a predecessor to SpongeBob SquarePants, being that after Rocko was cancelled, much of the staff went to work on SpongeBob, including Steven Hillenburg, the creative director for Rocko's Modern Life, who would go on to be the creator of SpongeBob SquarePants. For Nickelodeon, which again at the time was a network that only had 3 original cartoons running, Rocko's Modern Life was a breath of fresh air, a new fresh piece of content for viewers to enjoy, which they did. Rocko's Modern Life quickly became a classic in Nickelodeon's already impressive lineup of Nicktoons, and children all over the world would be enamored by the show for years to come. However, they weren't the only ones. The overall nature of the show appealed vastly to children, but there were some topics and scenes in the show that would be deemed highly relatable to parents of the children watching. The writers went out of their way to not just have children as their target audience, but adults as well. As a matter of fact, adults made up more than 1/5 of the audience during the show's original run. The producers of the show tackled this in a very calculated way as well. There are a wide variety of aspects to the show that would appeal to and be seen as relatable to adults, but one of the most notable aspects that's widely discussed is the hidden adult humor and innuendos sprinkled throughout the show. The writers of the show would go out of their way to sneak in this adult humor in places where it would go right over children's heads. Whereas the Ren and Stimpy Show would be a lot more blatant about its racy humor and gross out moments, Rocko's Modern Life would be a lot more discreet in that regard. A lot of times it wasn't so in your face, which worked to the show's benefit in my opinion. Parents in the 90s could let their kids watch Rocko's Modern Life and not have to worry about them catching the adult jokes. Meanwhile, the parents themselves could enjoy a good laugh without their kids being none the wiser. It was a genius idea that would gain the show a really special reputation. In many ways, Rocko's Modern Life, for all intents and purposes, was actually a show made for adults that was disguised as a show made for children, and I'm gonna prove it to you. That's why today, on our nostalgic walk down memory lane, we're gonna take a deep dive exploring the Rocko's Modern Life Iceberg. First things first, I have never made an Iceberg video before, so this is gonna be a lot of fun for me. As far as the structure of this video goes, just so you know like what to expect, we're going to start off with the more obvious references that are relatable to adults. From there, we're going to explore the innuendos and adult jokes that are seen throughout the series, starting out with the more obvious ones, then the more obscure ones, and finally, some that you might not notice without someone explaining them to you. Then, the next layer of the iceberg is going to be focused on the more disturbing, morbid, and dark references that probably flew over your head when you were a kid. And lastly, we're going to tackle the deep end of the iceberg by exploring the more controversial references, most of which have a deeper meaning that would require some explanation and research to understand. The tip of the iceberg starts with the beginning of each and every episode, the intro theme. Later on in the series, the theme would feature the B-52s, and it's just them repeatedly singing the name of the show. But it's not the words, it's what's going on screen that would resonate with most adults. As a kid, I didn't have any idea what was going on in the intro scene. I just thought it was like random stuff happening for the sake of comedy randomness, but watching it now as an adult, I'm able to make sense of what's going on and what it really symbolizes. There's a lot that happens in such a short amount of time here. It all begins with a baby Rocko falling out of his mom's pouch. Next, a clock walks up and smashes Rocko, and when he recovers, he's a little bit older, signifying the passing of time and how it hits you like a ton of bricks. Then we see a young Rocko playing baseball and getting hit by the ball. After that, a large pair of hands appears and stuffs a book that says knowledge into Rocko's head. If you look closely, you'll see Rocko get taller, signifying him aging up further as the knowledge that was crammed into his head spews out onto the ground, looking kinda like a pile of vomit, which, in my eyes, signifies how many of us go through school to get crammed full of random knowledge that the school sees fit for us, but when you reach adulthood, a good portion of what they taught you is useless in everyday life. They don't teach you about how or why you do your taxes or how your credit score works, but they'll be sure to tell you all about the War of 1812 or how to calculate the circumference and area of a circle. Next, we see the hands flick Rocko and his dog Spunky off screen and past a sign that says real world. Rocko splats onto the ground to be picked up by his best friend Heffer, then the group goes run off being chased by a dog and past a plethora of other side characters from the show. There's a lot going on here, but to sum it up, the intro of the show signifies the passing of time and being dropped into adulthood when you're totally not prepared. Now, moving on from there, there's a ton of situations and themes seen throughout the show that odds are your typical everyday adult is likely to relate to. For example, the scene in the episode Skid Marks where Rocko has to deal with the monotony of the DMV, or in many episodes we see Rocko at work. Then in the episode Canned, we see Rocko getting fired from his job and having to go stand in the unemployment line, all of which are situations that many adults have faced at one point. Another good example would be the company frequently seen in the show known as Conglomo. The company's slogan is "We own you," which is a reference to the power that a capitalist corporation is able to attain. Conglomo is just one example of notable political satire and comedy in Rocko's modern life in regards to corporatism. More obvious references to adult humor can be seen in many of the show's title cards. For example, Who Gives a Buck, an obvious play on words, Carnival Knowledge, which is a play on carnal knowledge, which literally means sexual intercourse, Schnitheads, which sounds a lot like shitheads, Skid Marks, which references, well, you know, From Here to Maternity, referencing motherhood, and lastly, Rocko's Happy Sack, which, if your mind is in the gutter like mine, I'm sure you can guess what they're referencing. Another obvious gag that's often talked about by fans of the show is everyone's favorite restaurant, Choky Chicken. The restaurant is supposed to be a play on KFC in the sense that it's a fast food joint that serves up fresh, hot, fried chicken. During season 4 of the show, they changed the name of the restaurant to Chewy Chicken due to the fact that the previous name was a reference to choking the chicken, which is a euphemism for jacking off. In the Rocko's Modern Life comic books, on the other hand, the restaurant was called Chunky Chicken for the same reason. Obviously, that's not the only talked about innuendo in the show. If you were to Google adult jokes in Rocko's Modern Life, nearly every article you see or video you watch is going to reference this next episode. This one is from the episode Canned. It starts with Rocko working the counter at Super Lot-O Comics when he gets called into the manager's office, handed a pink slip, and fired. Without a job, he can't pay for food, water, or electricity, so he goes through the classifieds to find a job. We see Rocko try his hand at being a tattoo artist as he's tattooing the uvula of a rhinoceros.
Remember, I wanted to cover the roof of my mouth and look just like the picture. A big can of beans that says Gloria on it.
Coming right up, Mr. Horny.
Of course his name is Mr. Horny. He has a horn, doesn't he? I mean, it only makes sense. After that doesn't work out, Rocko gets a gig as a plumber, which also doesn't work out. Then he stumbles across an ad for a job as a specialty phone operator.
Oh baby, oh baby, oh baby. Rocko? Mrs. Bighead?
This one right here has to be probably the most talked about dirty joke in the entirety of the show. Without a doubt, almost every time the topic is brought up, there's always someone who references this scene. The obvious implication being that Rocko took a job as a phone sex operator, not only by the context and what he's saying, but also notice the sign that says, "Remember, be hot, be naughty, be courteous." As for the rest of the episode, Rocko ends up working for his neighbor, Mr. Bighead at Conglomo, which goes terribly, and he stumbles across a new comic shop called kind of a lot of comics, where he gets hired. Moving on from there, we're gonna look at the season 2 episode Gutter Balls. Long story short, Rocko's neighbor Mr. Big Head is the coach for his wife's bowling team. They're in a tournament, but the team that they're going against quits, so instead of forcing the game to be forfeited and losing the opportunity to get a trophy, Mr. Big Head decides to try and convince Rocko, Heffer, and Filbert to be the rival team.
Hi, neighbor. How would you and your little friends like to play a game?
Well, we're already playing a game.
Hi, Mr. Big Head!
Take a closer look at the game that they're playing in that scene. Each player has a paddle and there's a monkey in the middle of the board, referencing the term spank the monkey, which is another euphemism for jerking off. As for the rest of this episode though, Rocko and his friends compete, but Mr. Big Head ends up being a huge jerk and his team quits on him mid-game, which leaves Rocko and his team taking home the trophy. Next up is going to be the season 4 episode, Seat to Stardom. This episode is chock full of butt jokes and puns. Rocko tries to get really big man's autograph while he's trying to put his handprints in wet cement. Rocko ends up putting his butt cheeks into the cement instead, and it goes viral all over the newspapers. As a result, Rocko becomes a famous underwear model. Rocko's lack of time due to his newfound fame puts a strain on his and Heffer's friendship, but they make up at the end of the episode, and Heffer ends up going out onto the runway to strut his stuff in nothing but a thong.
His posterior is simply superior!
This one is very obvious, but most kids won't know what a thong is, so the reference mostly flew over their heads. Next up is going to be the season 1 episode Cabin Fever. In this episode, we see Ed and Bev Big Head rent a cabin up in the mountains for a nice getaway, but when they get there, they realize that Rocko and Heffer rented the same exact cabin. Ed tries to argue, saying that he rented it for July 4th, but Rocko reminds him that it's currently January. Regardless, Rocko, being the kind person that he is, says that the Big Heads can stay in the cabin with them, much to Ed's displeasure. Ed decides that he's going to try to do everything he can to try to drive Rocko and Heffer out of the cabin, but he fails and in the process causes an avalanche that leaves them all trapped in the cabin. While they're in there, Ed tries contacting the outside world for help while Rocko, Heffer, and Bev relax and play some poker. Of course, the implication here is that they're playing strip poker, and Rocko and Heffer are obviously losing, given the fact that almost all of their clothes are on the table. In the end, hijinks ensue, and the group ends up knocking Mr. Big Head unconscious. He ends up imagining them as demons, and he goes crazy. He ends up building a cannon to shoot himself out of the cabin, and proceeds to crash land on a faraway island, while everyone else is rescued. Moving on, we have the season 1 episode, Power Trip. Rocko's boss, Mr. Smitty, goes out of town to get hair implants, and he leaves Rocko in charge of the comic book store. He tells Rocko to hire an assistant to help, so Rocko hires Filbert to help around the shop while Mr. Smitty is gone. Mr. Smitty gave Rocko one warning: do not press the green button in his office. Of course, Rocko ends up pressing the button, and his demeanor starts to change and match that of his boss, who is an absolute asshole. Rocko starts being a huge jerk to Filbert, and he fires him, leaving him tied up outside and in the street. Filbert ends up asking for the help of their favorite superhero, Really Big Man, whose name in and of itself is kind of suggestive. He uses his body in weird ways to make Rocko realize the error of his ways.
Look into my magic chest hairs.
Why, it's Filbert.
Out on the street. Look still deeper into my muscular bosom to view the relationship you and Filbert once had.
You see, it starts with the chest hair and the bosoms, and then the cherry on top comes when Really Big Man uses his really big nipples of the future to show Rocko where he's headed.
Look into the nipples of the future.
After that, Rocko gets his act together as he and Filbert start running the comic book shop the best they can.
Thanks, big man. We've all been touched by your bigness.
Mr. Smitty gets back and tells Rocko to fire Filbert, but Rocko refuses, so they both get fired and end up in the unemployment line. Meanwhile, back at the comic book shop, a new employee is running the register, and it's none other than Really Big Man's alter ego, Lois Lame. Next, we're looking at the season 3 episode, Schnitheads, which again, sounds a lot like shitheads. This episode revolves around Heffer joining a sausage-themed cult. In general, a lot of the dialogue in this episode seems to be one penis joke after the next.
Hell, is that a sausage in your pocket?
Oh, yeah!
This line was great as it would fly over the heads of all the children, but it's an obvious reference to an erection. Heffer ends up basically held hostage by the sausage cult while Rocko and Filbert try to figure out how to break him free.
It could happen to anyone. Sausages are very seductive.
The way Filbert's pupils dilate for a sec when he says that line really just drive the point home. Rocko and Filbert end up infiltrating the secret fortress of the cult, but they get captured. Thankfully, the King of Wieners shows up to rescue them. He claims that he is taking his most loyal followers home, but he just drops them off on a deserted island and he comes back to rescue Rocko and his friends. Back at Rocko's house, we learn that the King of Wieners is actually a really big man in disguise.
What in the blazes are you doing here?
I was just on my way home from Mardi Gras where I was crowned King Weenie, when I saw in my nipples of the future the trouble you were going to have.
Up next, we have the Season 3 episode, The Emperor's New Joe. It begins with Rocko walking to a coffee shop, and right out the gate we see this. The obvious joke being that the statue is built to look like it's peeing out the water. Rocko goes into the cafe that's run by the Chameleon Brothers, and he's disgusted by how awful their coffee is. They end up sitting him down and telling him the story of their homeland.
A tiny little empire known as Balzac.
In their old country, which is literally named after testicles, everyone was afraid of their leader, the Tsar of Balzac. The Tsar's only concern was that his kingdom be trendy, so he makes his people dress and look like him.
I love your butt! Love your butt!
And apparently, based off of that song, he loves butts. Trendy Tsar decides he wants coffee, and when the Chameleon Brothers can't oblige, they get sent to the dungeon. They end up brewing a coffee-like substance using dirty socks that they give to the Tsar, and of course everyone under his rule is forced to drink it. The brothers end up escaping and they flee to America, where they open a coffee shop with the same method, which is why the coffee is so bad. The whole episode is basically satire reflecting life under a cruel dictator. In the end, Rocko ends up giving a speech about why America is so great, which gets him thrown out of the coffee shop. Next up, we're gonna look at the Season 1 episode, Bedfellows. This episode is about Heffer getting kicked out of his house, so Rocko lets him crash at his place. Heffer ends up sleeping in Rocko's bed, leaving Rocko to sleep in his dresser drawers. Unfortunately, Heffer snores super loud.
I knew this would come in handy one day. Blazes.
Sheila?
This scene left me with two questions. First of all, who is Sheila, and what kind of kinky shit is Heffer into? The next day, Rocko's trying to use the bathroom after Heffer, and we see Rocko standing there butt naked as he gawks at the filth that is his bathroom. That won't be the only time we see Rocko naked in this episode. Later on, Heffer ends up hosting a nudist party at Rocko's house.
Nice Buick.
Rocko confronts Heffer, who's trying to explain his new lifestyle. Meanwhile,
Farewell. Nude!
Ned. Oh, you're right. Oh, yes, this is disgusting. Quick, Ed, get the telescope out of the hall closet.
Mrs. Bighead is apparently into voyeurism. In the end, Heffer moves back in with his parents, and Rocko ends up spying Mrs. Bighead partying with the nudists later that night.
Spunky, it's Mrs. Bighead. And the nudists!
Bev, what are all these freaks doing here?
Oh, shut up, Ed, and get your trousers off and join the party.
Next up is the Season 3 episode, Bye Bye Birdie. Filbert asks Rocko to look after his pet bird, Turdy, whose name is literally a poop reference. Turdy gets in all sorts of trouble, such as attacking Rocko's head, attacking Spunky, and, well...
Oh, my.
Oh, such a naughty bird.
Dirty! Excuse me.
The way Bev calls Turdy a naughty bird in that seductive voice is just so creepy. Turdy ends up escaping and is brought back to Rocko by a hog who tells Rocko to keep Turdy away from his pet monkey. Later, after Turdy has caused trouble for nearly everybody in town, Hef ends up jumping on the couch and accidentally sitting on Turdy, thus killing him. Needless to say, Filbert is devastated when he gets home, but he does reveal that Turdy's species only has a meager 3-week lifespan. They hold a funeral for Turdy, and right after, the hog from earlier comes back.
Hey you, bird boy.
Yes?
Here, This is yours. I ain't dealing with it.
Hey, monkey, you little sweetheart.
What's in the box? Money?
Oh my goodness. Little tiny baby monkey birds. I've got a whole family.
Of course, the implication here being that Turdy had sex with the monkey and got it pregnant. But hey, at least Filbert is happy to take custody of the litter of monkey birds. Moving on from there, we have the Season 2 episode, Snowballs. The premise of this episode is super simple. Rocko has to pick up some comic books from the other side of the mountains for work, and Heffer decides to come along, and they stop on the way to spend some time skiing on the mountain. There's a little more to it than that, but as far as what you need to know for the setup for this gag, that's about it. There's a scene where Rocko and Heffer go to use the outhouses, but Heffer's blown away when he finds out that it's going to cost him $10 to use.
$10? Forget that! I'm telling you, Rocko, it'll be the thrill of a lifetime!
Absolutely not.
It's free!
Free? Really? Now you're talking.
Come on! It's over here, and there's no line!
Of course, as you could probably tell by that zipping sound, the implication here being that instead of the outhouse, Heffer decided to pee in the snow, and he wrote his name in the snow with his pee. Now we're gonna look at the Season 1 episode, Sand in Your Navel. This episode takes place on a super hot day. In an effort to beat the heat, Rocko and Spunky take a trip to the very crowded local beach. While Rocko is setting up, Gladys Hippo asks him for a little help.
Excuse me, kind sir, would you mind buttering my back? Oh, you a darling. Kinda cute, too. My, those lenses are lovely.
How dare you!
I think she likes me.
Boy, you've got a buoy in your pants.
That buoy in your pants remark is definitely a euphemism for an erection. At one point, Spunky stumbles upon a crab who chases him.
Hoy, mi kulit pa mi pika.
The sentence that the crab said in Spanish straight up translates to "my ass is itchy." Later on, Rocko ends up finding himself on the other side of the beach. After getting pummeled by Gladys for a second time, Rocko finds Spunky, who's frozen in a block of ice and for sale at a fish stand, and they both go home where Rocko realizes that he got burnt to a crisp in the sun. Next, we're going to talk about the Season 1 episode, Leapfrogs. I've covered this episode on my channel in detail before, but it's literally full of sexual reference after sexual reference, so I can't not include it in this video. This episode has so many sexual references that it got literally banned from Nickelodeon in the US after airing just twice. However, the episode can still be found on DVDs and streaming platforms. The episode revolves around Bev Bighead feeling neglected by her husband, who finds her disgusting, so she invites Rocko over to fix some things while her husband is gone, and in the process she tries to seduce him. She starts by asking him to fix the VCR that she left unplugged, then she makes him sit down on the couch to watch a documentary about the mating habits of cane toads, the exact same species of toad that the Bigheads are.
Frank, get away from me.
Very educational.
If you look closely, you can clearly see the female toad has her boobs out. Next, she pours Rocko a glass of lemonade, which she spikes with Spanish fly, which is actually a well-known aphrodisiac that works similarly to Viagra. Next, we see her make Rocko help her zip up a red dress that's way too small for her.
Oh, that tickles. Oops. Oh.
After that, things get a little more direct with Mrs. Bighead, putting her eyes in Rocko's face, with the dialogue being almost as if they were boobs.
Don't you like my eyes? Hmm? Oh, yes. They're lovely. Touch them! Yes. Oh, my. Very soft and veiny.
And after that, Rocko gets launched into the ceiling fan.
Hey, you come down from there! You shaved for me?
Of course, the innuendo here refers to shaving pubic hair. Later on, when Rocko's about to leave, he's shirtless and Bev is handing him a wad of cash when Mr. Bighead walks in.
Mr. Bighead, it's not what you think. I mean, I was, and she...
The reference here infers that Rocko's a prostitute. Later on in the night, Mr. and Mrs. Bighead make up, and Mr. Bighead ends up breaking plates with his tongue, which turns Mrs. Bighead on.
Oh, Ed. Ed? Ed!
The ending implication here being them obviously having sex. Next up, we're going to look at some of the not so obvious innuendos found in the series, starting off with one that you'd need to do a little bit of research to find due to censorship. In the Season 2 episode Road Rash, we see Rocko and Heffer taking one final trip to Flem Rock, a tourist attraction that's about to be bulldozed. The trip there is filled with hijinks and hardships, as you'd expect. In the original uncensored version of the episode, we see a scene where the two stop at a hotel for the night. Now, just saying, the following scene I'm about to show you is going to be absolute potato quality because I had to dig deep through the trenches of the internet to find it.
Sorry, we full up. Won't have room for another 20 minutes. You wait? Oh, we have premature departure. You can have room now. How long you want?
Just till tomorrow.
All night? Okay.
There's a bit to dissect from this clip here. First of all, the No-Tell Motel is a gross, sleazy looking motel where the room reservations are clearly for short periods of time, implying that it's used for hookups and probably hookers. The guy running the hotel states that they had a premature departure, an obvious reference to premature ejaculation, given the context here. He also seems pretty blown away when Rocko remarks that they want the room all night. Lastly, in that final scene, we hear what sounds like beds knocking, and yet again Heffer saying Sheila, which again makes me wonder who is Sheila and what kind of kinky shit is Heffer into? The scene was cut from the episode due to the sexual references, but many people also believe that it was cut due to the fact that the motel employee was an offensive Asian stereotype. There's another scene that was cut from this episode that I wasn't able to find uncensored, but it's where their motorcycle breaks down and the guy who fixes it says that he had to re-torque their Johnson rods, which both words Johnson and rod are euphemisms for penises. In the censored version, the line is changed to re-torque your curtain rods. In the end, the two make it to Flem Rock just in time to see it get bulldozed and replaced with a choky chicken restaurant. Next up, we're going to look at the Season 1 episode Who Gives a Buck? In this episode, we see Rocko hanging out with Heffer.
What? The all-Scottish show? Why are we watching a 24-hour bagpipe station?
TV's on the fritz. It's all my lava lamp will pick up.
Did you catch that one? It may have gone by unnoticed, so just in case you did miss it, I'd like to point out that the all-Scottish show's initials are ASS. Long story short, Rocko's house is in shambles and his TV, furniture, and basically everything else need to be replaced, including Spunky's food dish. Rocko ends up getting a Conglamo credit card and going on a shopping spree with Heffer and Spunky. They go into a store that specializes in dog bowls.
Why don't you just jump on our doggy-style bow ride? Everybody on their hands and knees? Then here we go!
Of course, the innuendo here alluding to doggy-style sex. As far as the rest of the episode goes, in the end, all of the stuff Rocko bought ends up getting repossessed and he ends up back at square one. Next up, we're looking at another episode that was censored for sexual jokes that took it a little too far. The season 1 episode, The Good, the Bad, and the Wallaby, would see Rocko getting a letter from his uncle Gib, inviting him out to his ranch, which Rocko hasn't been to since he was young. Heffer decides to go with Rocko, and Rocko warns him that the ranch is no place for a steer, but takes him along regardless. Most of the episode is Rocko trying to prove his worth on the ranch, and Heffer trying to fit in with the herd of cattle. As far as what was deleted from this episode, we're treated to this scene where Heffer's trying to sleep late one night. You see, the big problem with this is that Heffer is a steer, and they don't have udders, so I'm sure you can guess what that guy attached the milking machine to. We follow up on this later in the episode when Rocko and Heffer go to leave the ranch.
Come on, Hef, let's get on back now.
Okay, but first I gotta say goodbye to someone special. Well, I guess this is goodbye. Just remember, the problems of two people don't amount to a hill of manure in this wacky world, but at least we'll always have the barn.
Next up, we're looking at yet another episode that was censored. The season 2 episode Hut Sut Raw would show Rocko, Heffer, and Filbert going camping. However, they aren't very good at it. They end up burning all the food, failing to put up the tent, and struggling to find water.
I'll always love you, baby.
Yuck! This water is disgusting. Did you get some water, Filbert?
We can't drink that water.
Why not?
Fish are dating in it.
Of course, the implication here being that the fish were banging in the water. They end up packing up and leaving, but they get lost and are so starving that Rocko suggests that they split up to find food, which is where the deleted scene comes into play.
We're all gonna die.
I'm hungry.
I'm starving. My back teeth are floating.
You better split up and look for food.
Oddly enough, this scene remains censored in most countries, excluding Canada, Germany, and Hungary. In the end, the friends realize that they aren't at a camping site, and they're actually on a wildlife reserve. They make their way home, and they camp in Rocko's front yard instead. Moving on, we have the season 1 episode Flu Innuenza. In this episode, Rocko ends up sick with the flu and wants to get cured in time to go to a big wrestling match. Rocko ends up going to see his doctor, Dr. Bendova, who himself has a very suggestive name. We see an eye chart on the wall that reads, "I'm a prisoner in the crazy doc's broom closet." We then see the doc try to diagnose Rocko.
Cough, please. Again. Again.
The doctor straight up grabs Rocko by the crotch and makes him cough 3 different times. After writing Rocko a prescription, he slides a glove on, saying that he has one last test to conduct, insinuating that he's gonna give poor Rocko a prostate exam. I also read online that apparently there's this scene in here where a doctor is called out over the speaker and it's Dr. Ned Crow-Filiac, but I wasn't actually able to find that for myself, so take that for what you will. Rocko ends up going home and takes the medicine that he was prescribed, only to read the label after and learn that it's not to be taken orally, insinuating that they prescribed him a suppository. He ends up hallucinating from the medicine, but wakes up feeling fine in the morning, only to miss the wrestling match because Spunky now has the flu from Rocko. Next up, we're going to look at the series premiere, No Pain, No Gain. That features Rocko and Heffer trying to get into better shape, so they go to a health spa to get some exercise. In this fancy spa, there's a rowing machine that has built-in video games you can play while you exercise. It ends up not giving Rocko the game he wanted to play, but instead gives him the game Deliverance, where this happens.
Here comes another one of them sissy exercise city boys sneaking up our river. Now we gonna make you squeal, piggy.
The pig getting its crotch tickled by a feather is just bizarre, but the name of the game and the comment about squealing like a pig is definitely a reference to the 1972 film Deliverance, and specifically the very uncomfortable scene where a redneck is R-wording a guy and telling him to squeal like a pig. Later on in this episode, we see Rocko and Heffer playing some basketball when Heffer goes in for an epic slam dunk and exposes some women that are taking a shower.
That's gonna cost you some big points.
Next up, in the Season 1 episode Carnival Knowledge, we see Rocko and Heffer going out for a day of fun at the carnival that's in town. There's two innuendos to bring up here. The first one comes in the form of a carnival ride that they checked out called the Elevator to Hell.
Watch your step. No, you don't, bub. Get back in there.
This is one that I was truly surprised wasn't censored whatsoever. In later episodes, any reference to hell is usually labeled as heck, but in this one they went with hell, didn't censor it or slyly cover part of the word or anything like that. Later on in this episode, we see them check out the merry-go-round.
This beaver looks safe.
I love chicken.
There's a few things to see here. First of all, the magazine that Slippy is looking at is called Play Slug and features a big-breasted slug on the cover wearing lingerie. I also saw people online saying that the animals on the merry-go-round are used in sexual euphemisms. The chicken, a reference to choking the chicken, the snake, probably referencing the infamous trouser snake, and the beaver, which is a euphemism for vaginas. There's other animals and random items on the merry-go-round, so there's a chance people are looking too far into it. However, when Rocko sits on the beaver, you can clearly see the anus of the pig in front of him, which I found hilarious. Now we dive into the Season 3 episode, Camera Shy. Rocko and his friends rent a video camera so they can record some videos for Rocko to send to his parents back in Australia so they can see what his life is like in O-Town. After a long day of filming random junk, Heffer and Filbert end up outside of Rocko's house at night filming him secretly.
He's completely naked.
With no clothes on.
Oh my gosh! He saw us! I think he saw us!
This might be technically considered revenge porn by definition, considering they give the raw footage to the Chameleon brothers to edit, and they have thousands of copies made of specifically the video where Rocko is nude without his consent. Rocko and his friends go on a quest to get all 11,000 copies and destroy them, which they're successful in, save for one copy that got sent to the Australian Film Festival and was seen by Rocko's parents. In the process of destroying all of the tapes, they stumble upon one called Toads in Love.
Toads in love. That's the big hit.
Given the context previously established regarding Ed breaking plates with his tongue, it's safe to say that they're insinuating that this is literally the Big Head's sex tape. Next, we're taking a look at the Season 3 episode, An Elk for Heffer. This episode is centered around Heffer and his coming of age.
Sit down, son. Son, there comes a time in every boy's life when...
Oh, Dad, is this about the birds and the bees?
No!
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure.
'Cause if it is,
It's not about that. It's about passing from boyhood to manhood.
Oh, so this is about the...
Virginia!
The obvious implication here that Heffer mistakenly thinks that his dad's gonna talk to him about sex. His parents say that for him to be considered an adult, he has to go out and bring an elk home for dinner. Of course, with his family being a group of wolves, the plan is for them to eat the elk for dinner, but Heffer misinterprets the message, believing that he needs to bring an elk to dinner as a guest. Heffer ends up meeting a female elk named Elkie, and they fall in love. They end up going on a date together where they share a milkshake, go on a romantic boat ride, and go through the Tunnel of Love.
Looks sharp, look bright, look up, look cool, look out, it's gonna go.
In this scene, when they enter the Tunnel of Love, behind them is a pair of rabbits also about to enter, but when they exit, the rabbits are accompanied by about 8 baby bunnies, implying that they were banging in the Tunnel of Love. Eventually, Heffer brings Elkie home to meet his family, and they reveal the plan was for them to eat her. Heffer refuses to let them devour her in the end, and she ends up breaking up with him. Up next, we have the Season 2 episode, Hair Licked. This episode would see Rocko asking his jerk of a boss for a raise, but instead, his boss insists that he's going to make Rocko Employee of the Month and get his picture in the newspaper. Rocko decides that he's going to have Filbert, who has a career as a photographer, take the picture for the newspaper. The day of the photo shoot, Rocko is having a really bad hair day, so he jumps through a few hoops to get his hair done. We end up cutting to Filbert's trailer, where he's finishing up a photo shoot.
Okay, ladies, that's all for today. We got some very nice shots. I'm sure Vague Magazine will love them. Bye.
Filbert?
Oh, hi, Rocko. Just setting up for you.
Who are they?
Oh, just some fashion models.
I spill my puffies.
In that bit, we see 2 very feminine pairs of legs walking by, followed by a pair of more masculine-looking legs. As they walk by, Rocco's blushing and seems embarrassed. Heffer does the same thing. Of course, the implication here being that Filbert was shooting a porno. Finally, it's Rocco's turn, and we see him getting photographed by Filbert.
Okay, work with me, Rocko. Give it to me, baby.
When Filbert's saying, "Give it to me, baby," in that seductive manner, I can't help but think of Austin Powers and the way he photographs women, and we all know how that usually ends up. In the end, Rocco's picture in the newspaper ends up looking like shit anyways. Now we're gonna look at some episodes that have at least one innuendo that might be more obscure and harder to notice. They don't all have to be obscure, but at least one reference in the episode might go unnoticed. Starting off, we have the Season 1 episode, Love Spanked. Given the nature of this episode, it has a ton of hidden sexual references. The episode starts off with Rocko anxiously waiting for the newspaper to be delivered so he can watch his next door neighbor, Melba, who he has a crush on, pick it up off of her porch. Rocko gets all worked up over literally just seeing her arm go out the door to pick up the paper.
Melba.
In this scene, if you look close at the heart when it comes out of Rocco's backside, it's all hairy and looks exactly like a nutsack. After pointing out that Melba has a boyfriend, Heffer suggests that Rocko put a personal ad in the newspaper, searching for a girlfriend. He even writes the ad for Rocko.
Marsupial with big hairy chest, seeking female with same. Will suck the fillings out of your teeth if you let me. I am adventurous and will try anything once. Twice if you're lucky!
The innuendo here, of course, insinuates that Rocko is adventurous in bed. The ad works, and Rocko gets a ton of letters back. He goes on a date with a bunny with an overprotective dad, and then this happens.
So, what do you want to do?
How about I walk you back to the door?
How about we trade math equations, baby?
Long story short, the bunny wanted to bang Rocko, and her dad ends up beating the hell out of him. After a few unsuccessful dates, Rocko ends up going on a dating show.
Date number 2, a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, Yvonne claims her only weakness is an unbearable fetish for short wallabies.
I'm not 100% sure what kind of animal this is. Judging by the lips and what looks like possibly fins, I'm gonna say it's a fish, but either way, she has an unbearable fetish for short wallabies, apparently.
That leaves us with your date, who not only loves building models of the Titanic and jackhammering, but is content just spending a lot of time on the couch. Your date, Heffer!
The implication here with the jackhammer and spending lots of time on the couch is an obvious nod towards sex. Later on, we see Rocko and Heffer coming out of the Tunnel of Love.
I'm sorry about this, Rocko. The third contestant had to do a bikini calendar photo shoot and they needed a stand-in.
That guy coming out by himself and giggling really just feels like a masturbation joke. After all the failures with finding love, Rocko ends up getting the courage to introduce himself to Melba, and when he tells Heffer that, Heffer says that she'll definitely want to meet him after reading this ad he put in the paper.
Melba, I'm madly, hopelessly, and deeply in love with you. Let me dance in your love cups and serve you tea. Forever yours, your next door neighbor, Rocko?
I love the love cups part.
Rather subtle, but when Heffer says love cups in that ad, he's referencing a bra. The next one's gonna be short, sweet, and to the point because the innuendo that's dropped here doesn't have an awful lot to do with the storyline of the episode. It's more of a gag that occurs at the very end before the credits roll. The season 4 episode Rugbirds revolves around Filbert and Rocko on a bird wig snatching hunt, and Rocko nearly getting eaten by the legendary American balding eagle. In the end of the episode, we see Rocko throw away a bunch of wigs in a trash can.
Wow, these are great!
The monkey putting wigs on his butt seems like a random funny gag, but if you stretch your imagination just a little bit, you might think that this is a reference to a merkin, also known as a pubic wig. Next up, we have the season 1 episode Clean Lovin'. This one begins with a movie on TV that portrays two people who are in love dancing. When Spunky sees the dancing and looks over to see Rocko mopping in a similar motion, Spunky ends up getting all horned up and falling in love with the mop. They throw in that train going into tunnel clip out of nowhere as a subtle nod to having sex, and then the buttering bread clip as a nod to ejaculating, implying that Spunky wants to bang the mop. Later on, Rocko isn't able to find Spunky, so he goes looking for him. The squeaking as Rocko approaches the door, the way that Spunky's laying with the mop, and the puddle of what could possibly be jizz implies that Spunky just finished doing the deed with the mop. What Rocko says to him after basically confirms it too.
What were you doing in there? No, don't tell me. It's sick, it's wrong. Do you know what I've mopped up with that thing?
After Rocko fails to keep Spunky away from the mop, he ends up taking Spunky to a very weird pet psychologist.
I'm at the end of my rope, Doc. I don't know what to do.
I understand. Believe me, I've seen worse, but you have to admit, it's a very attractive mop.
The doctor talks to Spunky and the mop alone for a bit, but then he ends up bringing Spunky out, claiming that he seems normal, but that he wants to have a word alone with the mop.
It's all right, Spunky. He'll be right back.
Just as I thought. Your dog is perfectly normal, but what we have here is a very sick mop. I must keep it for observation.
This made me feel so bad for Spunky. He pretty much got cucked by this doctor, and he is clearly very upset about it. In the end, we end up seeing the doctor out on a date with the mop. Meanwhile, Spunky falls in love with something else. Up next, we have the season 1 episode, Who's for Dinner? This is the first time we see Heffer's family in the series. The episode centers around Heffer inviting Rocko to dinner at his house, and Rocko meeting his family for the first time. Rocko is surprised to find out that Heffer was adopted by a pack of wolves. As far as innuendos brought up in this episode, there's a few vagina jokes sneakily hidden throughout the episode. The first one happens when Rocko meets Heffer's grandpa. Grandpa mistakes Rocko for a beaver and makes this comment.
Oh, coyote, huh? Ah, you can't fool me. I can smell a beaver from 30 miles away. Beaver!
Again, as I stated earlier in this video, beaver is a euphemism for a hairy vagina. If you connect the dots, the writers are implying that Heffer's grandpa can smell a hairy vagina from 30 miles away. Later on in the episode, we also hear Grandpa make this comment.
I say we eat the beaver.
Of course, given the previous context, this would be a reference to oral sex. Lastly, there comes a point when Heffer goes out to find his real dad's grave.
That's not my grave.
The reference here being that pussy is another word for cat, and you could see this as here lies a big wet pussy, which is another reference to vaginas. Now, by this point, you might be wondering, why was Heffer looking for his father's grave in this episode? Well, that's a great question and a perfect transition to our next level of the iceberg, the more disturbing, morbid, and dark references. Continuing where we left off with Who's for Dinner? Again, the entire premise is Rocko finding out that Heffer was adopted by wolves. Heffer also realizes that he was adopted, having never put 2 and 2 together. We see a scene where Heffer and his family are eating dinner at the table.
In all the years I've known him, He never once told me he was adopted.
I couldn't not bring this one up. Kind of random, but the heart on this moose is still beating, implying that they are literally eating it while it's alive. Getting back to the topic at hand though, Heffer's mom explains that they found him as a calf and he was stick thin, so they decided to fatten him up.
But what about my birthmark?
It's not directly said, but obviously they're alluding to the fact that they were trying to fatten up to eat him, but they didn't, and they've been lying to him about it all these years. Later on, we see Heffer go back to the farm where his parents found him all those years ago, looking for his biological father. This is the point where he finds what he thinks is his biological father's grave, but then a window to his father magically appears, and he explains how that isn't his grave.
I'm not even dead. I'm living in Canoga Park with Joyce here. Say hello.
Hi, nice to meet you. You should visit us sometime.
Mom?
That's not your mom. Your mom's a car seat in Illinois.
The reference here being that Heffer's mother is dead and her leather was used to make a car seat.
Why don't you leave me alone? I'm tired of you kids coming around looking for your daddy. I've had a million kids that look exactly like you. Ugly! Joyce, come here and clean up after me.
After realizing how much of a jerk his biological father is, Heffer goes back home realizing how lucky he is to have a family of wolves that cares for him. Up next, we have the Season 1 episode To Heck and Back. This episode begins with a chicken named Karen having a job interview at Choky Chicken headquarters. After getting hired, we immediately cut to a clip of a dead chicken in packaging being shipped to a Choky Chicken restaurant, and on that package of chicken, we see Karen's name tag, implying that she was killed and is gonna be eaten. We then cut to the restaurant she's being delivered to as we see Rocko and Heffer eating.
Oh, come on, no need to be all choked up, Hef. Heffer?
Moo!
Heffer! He's joking! He's joking! Is there a doctor in the house?
Heffer literally chokes and dies right there on the ground in front of everybody, and not a single doctor in the building is willing to help him. We see Heffer's soul leave his body through his anus, then he starts flying for the big cheeseburger in the sky, only to have his wings melt as he falls straight down to hell. When he lands, we see a sign that clearly says hell on it, but the L's are covered up by a C and a K, making it smell heck instead.
TV from heck!
Hey! Wait a minute. Heck? Isn't it supposed to be censors?
Heffer's greeted by Peaches, who is basically the devil, and he explains gluttony to Heffer and shows him a video of his wrongdoings throughout his life. Meanwhile, back on the mortal plane, Rocko is trying to resuscitate Heffer. Peaches starts explaining how Heffer's gonna suffer for all eternity. Just then, Rocko ends up bringing Heffer back to life. Heffer and Rocko end up leaving to head out to the movies back together.
Hey, you don't mind stopping at the beef barge on the way, do you? I'm starved.
Have you learned nothing?
Heffer wakes up to realize that it was all a dream, but then his house, and the houses around his, turn into Peaches, and he wakes up yet again.
Heffer, let's go!
Rocko!
Heffer realizes that he is actually alive and awake this time, as he and Rocko prepare to go to the comic book store. That's when a familiar face from the beginning of the episode shows up.
Hi, Hef!
Hey, Karen. Whoa, looking good.
Oh, thanks. I've got an interview down at the Choky Chicken Corporation.
Hey, well, good luck.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye!
Choky Chicken? I love Choky Chicken. Could we please stop there on the way, Rock?
Okay, buddy, but we'll have to make it quick.
As Karen walks off to go to her interview, Heffer asks Rocko if they can stop at Choky Chicken on the way, thus implying that they are starting the chain of events seen in Heffer's dream.
662, 663, 664, 665!
1, 2, 3, 4, Why?
That last reference, of course, being 12666, the number of the beast. Up next, we're going to check out the Season 4 episode, Hef in a Handbasket, which I've covered in a previous video, but I definitely need to bring up. I'm not sure where this episode stands in the lore of Rocko's modern life. There's not exactly an ongoing story in this show, as every episode is a different storyline, but I like to imagine this one takes place before To Heck and Back, as it would give a little more context as to why Heffer would be condemned to hell in the first place. If you want the full rundown of this episode, check out my video titled The Best Episode of Rocko's Modern Life. I'll link it down in the description. Long story short, Heffer literally sells his soul to the devil in exchange for the opportunity to be on a game show.
If you'd like to be a contestant on our show, just call 555 and then a bunch of sixes!
6666!
The catch is that the prize in this game show is a trip to hell for all eternity. The game show Heffer plays is hosted by Peaches and is called 666. The goal is to get 666 points. When Heffer wins and makes it to hell, him and Peaches are confronted by Grandma Wolf.
Grandma!
Take it easy, Chunky. You and I need to have a little talk. I am not going to spend eternity with this rhinoceros crashing around, spoiling my peace and quiet.
We find out that Grandma is spending eternity in hell and that she hates her own grandson.
Grandma, Mom and Dad said that you went up to heaven.
They've been spooning you a bunch of hooey, Hefty. You think I want to slouch around with a bunch of sandal-wearing Santa Clauses? I like it here. It's warm.
She calls them sandal-wearing Santa Clauses, and as all of you know, Santa Claus isn't real, which is kind of an implication that heaven and angels aren't real either. This episode was actually pulled from the air due to Heffer selling his soul to the devil, but it was finally unbanned on February 14th, 2021. The premise is overall controversial, and there are many satanic references in this episode. Again, if you want a more in-depth analysis, click that link in the description. Up next, we're going to look at the Season 2 episode, Commuted Sentence. As far as this one goes, the reference is kind of a sexual joke, but it's a pretty fucked up one, so I figured I'd throw it in the disturbing section, all things considered. In this episode, Rocko's car ends up getting impounded and sent to car jail. The car uses his one phone call to call Rocko.
It's for you, Rocko. It's your car.
My car? Hello? Rocko, I've been impounded. You gotta come bail me out. Hurry!
After Rocko's car tells him to hurry, we cut to Rocko making a concerned face as we hear that squeaking sound in the background through the phone, basically implying that Rocko's car is getting R-worded by the other car in jail. Again, kind of a sex reference, but a totally fucked up one. Later on, Rocko goes to pick up his car.
I've come down to bail out my car. It's that red one over there.
Oh yeah, the other cars call them fancy fenders. Term of endearment, I'm sure.
Now we're going to take a look at another episode featuring Rocko's car, the Season 3 episode, Manic Mechanic. In this episode, we see Rocko and Heffer heading out for a big concert when Rocko's car dies.
You must be the Grim Tow Truck. Does this mean I'm...
It is time for you to go to that big parking lot in the sky.
He takes it to a mechanic who laughs at him and says there's nothing that they can do, so Rocko ends up taking matters into his own hands and he has Filbert help him fix it instead. Now, watch very closely in this scene while the car's soul falls down into its body.
All right, Heffer, start it up. It's alive!
You probably missed that because it's very subtle, so let's play that back again. If you look closely at the wooden poles on the wall behind the car, you will notice that they spell out the letters HIV. Many people think that this is a reference to the scene in the Season 2 episode Commuted Sentence where Rocko's car gets R-worded in jail. Now we move on to the final section of the iceberg. We're looking at the more controversial topics and some deep cut references that you might need more in-depth explanation to understand. Also, some of these things probably flew over your head as a kid and may have actually flown over your parents' heads too. First up, we're going to jump into the Season 2 episode Tickled Pinky. This episode sees Rocko and Heffer at a jackhammer convention. First of all, I'd like to point out that they see an attraction called Jack All You Want, which seems to be a reference again to jacking off, but that's just hilarious and not the deep cut reference that would probably have flown over your head. Just for context, Rocko ends up passing out at the convention and goes to the ER where he's told that he needs his appendix removed.
My name's Pinky. I'm your appendix.
But Pinky, if you don't go away, I can't get better.
I know, but I'm scared.
Bear in mind that all of this is a hallucination and Rocko's appendix isn't really talking to him. Feeling bad for his appendix though, he takes it to the carnival and gives it one last day of fun before it goes away. His appendix puts him through some precarious situations and Rocko ends up getting fed up with it.
That's it. The carnival, fine. The roller coaster, okay.
Oh, Rocko.
But then the bungee jumping, the wall of death, flying over the Andes with the Brazilian soccer team.
Which brings us to the topic at hand. Rocko talking about flying over the Andes with a Brazilian soccer team is a reference to the Andes flight disaster from 1972. Back on October 13th, 1972, Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 was flying to a city in Chile's Central Valley with 45 passengers and crew, including 19 members of a rugby team. While crossing the Andes during poor weather, the inexperienced co-pilot mistakenly believed that they had reached their destination, despite instrument readings that indicated otherwise. The aircraft began descending too early and it struck a mountain, shearing off both wings and the tail section. The remaining portion of the fuselage slid down the mountain about 2,400 feet before striking ice and snow on a glacier. 3 crew members and 8 passengers died immediately. Several more died soon afterward due to the frigid temperatures and the severity of their injuries. Authorities ended up flying over the crash site several times over the next few days, searching for the aircraft, but couldn't see the white fuselage against the snow. Search efforts were canceled after 8 days. During the next whopping 72 days, the survivors suffered exposure, starvation, and an avalanche, and 13 more passengers died. Some even resorted to cannibalism. As the weather improved with the southern hemisphere spring, 2 survivors, Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa, climbed up a 15,000-foot mountain peak without any gear, and they hiked for 10 days into Chile to seek help, traveling 38 miles. On December 23rd, 1972, 2 months after the crash, the last of the 16 survivors were rescued. Up next, we're going to look at the Season 1 episode, Skid Marks. In this episode, we see Rocko getting pulled over by the police and his car getting impounded due to a missing gas cap. The only way for Rocko to get his car back is by going through the dreaded DMV. They make him get an eye exam.
Supple and firm. Good muscle tone. Youth. Cough, please. Okay, Rocky. Everything looks great!
Now, for those of you that have never had a physical, this is a reference to a hernia exam where a doctor usually feels around your testicles and tells you to cough. Hilarious, yes, but not the deep cut reference we're talking about. No. When Rocko first walks into the DMV, we see this scene. See that sign on the far right that says Jimmy Hoffa? Well, what you probably didn't know is that Jimmy Hoffa was an American labor union leader who served as the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters from 1957 all the way up until 1971. Hoffa became involved with organized crime from the early years of his Teamsters work. He was convinced of jury tampering, attempted bribery, conspiracy, and mail-and-wire fraud in 1964 in 2 separate trials. He was imprisoned in 1967 and sentenced to 13 years. He got out 4 years later in 1971, then 4 years after that, on July 30th, 1975, he mysteriously went missing. He's believed to have been murdered by the mafia, and his legacy still continues to stir debate. After getting let out of prison, he was barred from union activity until 1980, but he tried to overturn that decision and reclaim his position as president of the IBT. However, several members of the mafia opposed the idea of him regaining leadership. One member of the mafia that Hoffa had previously had feud with went as far as threatening to pull out his guts and kidnap his grandchildren. This member of the mafia was also associated with the ITB, and at least 2 of his union opponents had been murdered, and others who had spoken out against him had been assaulted. There's a lot more to the story and more people involved. Google it if you want a more in-depth breakdown, but as far as this day and age goes, as of 2021, there are still digs conducted in the Detroit area in search of Hoffa's body, but a common theory among experts is that the body was cremated. Moving on from there, we're going to tackle the Season 1 episode, A Sucker for the Sucko-Matic. This episode sees Rocko's old vacuum dying and spewing dust all over his house. Then a commercial comes on the TV for the new Sucko-matic vacuum, which literally brainwashes Heffer, Rocko, and Spunky into buying one. The vacuum ends up being different than the one they saw on TV, but Rocko still uses it anyways. He cleans the whole house with it and even cleans Spunky with it too.
Maybe we should try the neutering device later.
Now, I don't know what's more alarming, the fact that this vacuum has a neutering function, or the fact that Rocko is thinking about actually using it on Spunky. A hilarious, cheeky adult joke, but not the controversial reference we're talking about. Later on, Rocko moves on to vacuum his yard. Here we see a voyeuristic gopher spying on the naked fairies in Rocko's garden. Again, cheeky adult joke, but not quite the controversial reference we're gonna look at.
What we do here is go back.
The controversial reference is gonna actually come into play at the beginning of this episode. When we see Rocko attempting to vacuum his house with his crappy old vacuum, Heffer is flipping through channels on the TV.
Reporting live from Washington, D.C. The official motorcade is just coming around the corner now, and oh my god, there's a burst of gunfire.
It's the final game in the World Series. 2 out, bases loaded on a 3-2.
This news clip is a reference to the assassination of the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, that occurred on November 22nd, 1963. JFK was riding in a presidential motorcade through Dallas, Texas with his wife, the governor of Texas, and the governor's wife, when he was fatally shot from a nearby building by Lee Harvey Oswald. He would be pronounced dead approximately 30 minutes later. The governor of Texas also suffered a serious gunshot wound, however, he would recover from his injuries. Contrary to the audio clip used in this episode, no news or radio stations were broadcasting the incident live. However, a 26-second full-color video was shot on silent 8mm film and captured the seconds before, during, and after the assassination. There are many conspiracy theories out there about what had happened and who may have been involved, but regardless of what you believe, the event was a truly shocking and sad moment in United States history. Next, we're going to look at the Season 4 episode Closet Clown. This episode begins with a clown's car breaking down outside of Mr. and Mrs. Big Head's house. Mr. Big Head hears the sound of the clown trying to fix his tire, and he gets very angry just at the fact that the clown even exists in the first place.
We don't like your kind around here.
Look, pal, we don't want any trouble.
Shut up, Duck! You people make me sick with your floppy feet and your...
Ed, why don't you leave them alone?
Mr. Big Head scares off the clown by chasing him with a metal rake, and then he has the clown's car towed. But as the tow truck drives off, a red clown nose rolls in front of Mr. Big Head on the ground.
Look at me, I'm a clown. Give me a break.
We see Mr. Big Head hide the nose from his wife. He even goes to work and hides the nose in his briefcase, and it's all he can think about while he's in a work meeting, which leads to him locking himself in the bathroom and putting on the nose.
Hello, everyone. I'm a clown. I'm a clown. I'm a clown.
His stickler of a boss ends up being in the bathroom and catching him. He angrily tells Big Head that he wants to see him in his office.
Come in, Mr. Dupet.
A ring-a-ding-ding!
Mr. Dupet?
I had a funny feeling about you, Big Head. No, what are you into, Birthdays, barbecues, bat mitzvahs?
Well, I don't know. I never...
Don't tell me you haven't gone public yet. If this is part of you, Big Head, you're going to have to accept it sometime. It might as well be now.
Mr. Big Head's boss, who is also a closet clown, makes a call and gets him signed up to perform at a birthday party, which goes really well. The kids love him, and he deems himself Ed the Clown. Mr. Big Head ends up spending all of his time on being a clown at various events, which leaves his wife feeling neglected as he hides his secret lifestyle. Then a few days later, we see Rocko, Heffer, Filbert, Dr. Hutchinson, and Mrs. Big Head celebrating Filbert and Hutch's kid's birthday. When the doorbell rings, we learn that Ed the Clown was booked for the party. Once he realizes that his wife and neighbors are there, he passes out from embarrassment, and when he wakes up, the kids take his nose and everyone realizes who he is.
Mr. Big Head's a clown! Oh, boy! Sorry.
Wait! I can explain!
Ed, you're a clown!
No, I'm not well... Yes, I'm a clown!
Mr. Big Head expects his wife to be ashamed, but she's relieved to find out his secret, and she doesn't care what he is as long as he is still her husband. That's when everyone starts to admit their secrets as well.
Everyone has secrets. That's what makes us special.
Yeah? Sometimes I like to pretend I'm a pixie.
Well, I'm wearing European-style undergarments.
There, you see? And well, I've always liked rainbows.
Rocko!
Oh my!
That's disgusting!
Let's get him.
Okay, now there's a couple things we gotta dissect here. First of all, Filbert's admission to wearing European-style undergarments is basically him telling everyone that he's wearing a thong. Meanwhile, Rocko's admission of liking rainbows gets him ostracized and chased out by everyone like they're an angry mob. There's a lot of metaphors and symbolism in this episode portraying coming out as part of the LGBTQ+ community. The rainbow has, for decades now, been a symbol of pride for the gay community. As far as the history goes, a man by the name of Gilbert Baker served in the US Army from 1970 to 1972, and after being honorably discharged, he taught himself how to sew. Then, in 1974, he met Harvey Milk, who was an influential gay leader, who later challenged Baker to devise a symbol of pride for the gay community. The original gay pride flags flew at the San Francisco Gay Freedom Day Parade celebration on June 25, 1978. Prior to that, the pink triangle had been used as a symbol for the LGBT community. However, the pink triangle represented a dark chapter in history. The Nazi regime had used the pink triangle to identify and stigmatize people interned as being LGBT in concentration camps. Rather than continuing to rely on a Nazi tool of oppression, the community sought a new inspiring symbol, which is where the rainbow flag came into play. The overall theme of this episode is an allegory alluding to someone being in the closet and then being afraid to come out to their friends and family, as shown by Mr. Big Head being afraid to go public with his clown persona. The scene with Rocko at the end, though, with everyone attacking him for liking rainbows, while everyone else's secrets were accepted, is a more direct symbolism for how homophobic people react to people who are part of the LGBTQ+ community. The message given by this episode is rather controversial, given the moral of the story being that you should be yourself and how your loved ones should accept you for who you are. However, the rainbow gag at the end of the episode completely kind of contradicts that message. This episode was also supposedly not broadcast on Nick Rewind until February of 2021, likely because of the theme of the episode. Now, there's one last episode with controversial references that we're going to talk about, and that would be the Season 3 episode, The Big Question. The episode begins with Filbert planning to ask Dr. Hutchinson to marry him. He calls her, planning to get together so that he can ask her, but she says maybe tomorrow.
Oh, hello, Turtle Dove. What's that? Well, no, I can't. My high school reunion is tonight, and, well, an old friend is in town, and, how about tomorrow? Okay? Bye-bye.
Rocko won't accept that answer, and he decides that they're gonna drive right over to her house to catch her before she leaves. When they get there, they're stopped dead in their tracks when they spy Hutch leaving on a motorcycle with a big muscular cat who's an old friend from high school. Then Hutch's mom appears.
It's the widow Hutchison!
Turtles and cats together, that's not right. I may be old and ugly, but I still know when my daughter is in love, and that high school hunk of hers is the real thing. You stick with your own kind, sniveling pet shop sap.
Is it gone?
The reference shown here being Widow Hutchinson's opinion on a turtle and cat getting married, paralleling that of some who disdain marriage that isn't deemed, quote, traditional by their definition of the word. be it same-sex marriage, interracial marriage, or anything else they deem not traditional by their bigoted standards. We see a similar reference in the season 1 episode Who's for Dinner that I covered earlier, specifically when Heffer's grandpa keeps calling Rocko a beaver, making comments about him building a dam, and he even makes a comment about how they're gonna throw away the plates after the beaver's done eating off of it. We learn that Heffer's grandpa also has an intense hatred of wallabies. All of this parallels the behavior of someone who's a bigoted racist. As for the rest of the big question, later on in the episode, Rocko, Heffer, and Filbert sneak into the high school reunion. Filbert confronts Hutch to pop the question to her.
Will you marry me?
Okay. Hey, but what about, aren't you know, with the guy, that thing with the him?
Who? Tiger?
The laughing after the comment about Tiger is possibly implying that Tiger is gay and wouldn't be interested in Dr. Hutchinson as she's a woman. That last bit isn't controversial, but just kind of a cheeky gag that I felt like deserved to be thrown in while we're covering this episode. Filbert gives Hutch the gold engagement hook that he bought for her, and the episode ends on a happy note with the two engaged. And that, my friends, is the end of what I call the Rocko's Modern Life Iceberg. This is the longest video I've ever made, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Do me a huge favor, and if you made it all the way to the end of this video, leave me a comment with the word engagement hook. That way I know that you made it all the way through, and I'll look out for those comments, and I will thank you personally. I just want you to know that if you did make it this far, I really appreciate you watching this video, and your support means the world to me. Also, I'd like to say that there's probably some more innuendos sprinkled throughout the series that I didn't cover in this video, and that's totally fine. This is just something I threw together, and I hope you enjoyed it regardless. But what do you think? Did most of these references go over your head as a kid? If you're a parent of young kids, do you let your kids watch Rocko's Modern Life? And which reference or innuendo was your favorite? Let me know in the comments down below. I always love reading your guys' feedback. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like and give praise to the YouTube algorithm with hopes that it promotes this video to everyone else. And as always, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.